I sat in the back row of that boardroom and listened to my own son-in-law tell 23 people I had been a drag on this family for 30 years. He wore a navy suit my daughter probably picked out for him. He had a folder in front of him, leather-bound, the kind you buy at the Hallmark counter when you want to look serious. He stood up, cleared his throat the way he always does before he says something cruel, and said, "Let's be honest. He's just a tired old freeloader, and we all know it." I didn't move. I didn't move. I didn't blink. The court reporter. Yes, my son-in-law had hired a court reporter for a family meeting. That's the kind of man he is. Paused her fingers above the keys and looked up at me, waiting to see if I'd answer. I didn't. I folded my hands on the table and watched my son-in-law's mouth move. Then the estate attorney, a woman named Mrs. Caldwell, took her glasses off and asked him a question so simple it should have been easy. "Sir, do you actually know who this man is?" The room went quiet. My son-in-law's mouth opened and stayed open. My daughter, sitting beside him in a cream-colored blouse she'd had pressed that morning, turned the same color as the blouse. "I'm going to go back. I have to, or none of this makes sense. My name is Wendell Boone, and I am 67 years old. I was born in a little Kentucky town nobody outside of Kentucky has ever heard of, and I left it the day I turned 18 with a duffel bag and a Greyhound ticket to Cincinnati. I worked the line at a steel mill. I worked nights at a warehouse. I went to community college on the GI Bill. After 2 tours, nobody asks me about anymore. I met my wife, Caroline, at a diner where she was pouring coffee for tips, and I married her on a Tuesday in November because it was the only day the courthouse had openings. We had one daughter. Her name is Marjorie. She's 41 now, and I love her the way a man loves the only good thing his life ever produced. Even now, after everything, I love her. Caroline passed 3 years ago. Pancreatic. Quick. The way they say it never is, but for us it was. She was diagnosed in March and gone by August, and the day after the funeral my daughter and her husband, a man named Brent Pettigrew, though I have called him a great many other things in my own head, sat me down at my own kitchen table and told me they were concerned about my future. That was the word they used. Concerned. Brent is a financial advisor. That's what his business card says. What he actually does is sell variable annuities to widows in Cincinnati and parts of northern Kentucky on commission, and what he is good at is the part where he leans in and lowers his voice and tells you he's thinking about your family. He is 43 years old, has a personal trainer, drives a Lexus he can't quite afford, and owns exactly one book, which is on his coffee table and has never been opened. I know this because I tested it. I put a folded receipt between pages 48 and 49 the first Christmas after he married my daughter. 3 years later, it was still there. Anyway, concerned about my future. What they wanted, Marjorie explained, and I noticed even then that Brent let her do the talking, because he is a coward about the parts that might make a daughter cry, was for me to sign over power of attorney. Just for estate organization purposes, she said, just to make things easier. Brent was offering, out of the kindness of his heart, to handle the consolidation of my and Caroline's accounts. Caroline had her own retirement, you see. Caroline had taught 4th grade for 31 years in the Kenton County School District, and she had a teacher's pension and a 403(b) and a small life insurance policy through the union, and Brent wanted to consolidate all of that. I said I'd think about it. That night I sat alone at the kitchen table, where I had eaten breakfast with my wife for 41 years, and I thought about a great many things. I thought about Caroline. I thought about how she used to laugh at my handwriting. I thought about the day Marjorie was born, and the day Marjorie brought Brent home, and the way Caroline had squeezed my hand under the table at dinner and said nothing. And I thought about what I actually do for a living. This is the part where I have to tell you something, and I'd ask you to keep it to yourself, even though I suppose it doesn't matter anymore. Most people in my life, including my daughter, including her husband, including the men I drink coffee with on Saturdays at the McDonald's on Madison Pike, believe I am a retired warehouse manager. I let them. I let Caroline tell her sister I'd taken early retirement from the Kroger distribution center. I let Marjorie tell her friends in college that her dad worked in logistics. None of it was a lie exactly. It just wasn't the whole thing. What I actually did for 31 years was forensic accounting for an insurance fraud investigation unit out of Covington. I am, was, and remain a certified fraud examiner. I have testified in federal court 42 times. I worked white-collar crime cases that made the front page of the Inquirer and a couple that didn't because the people involved had lawyers good enough to keep them off it. I spent 31 years watching men exactly like my son-in-law try to move money in ways that wouldn't show up. I know every single one of their tricks. I know them the way a plumber knows pipes. I never told Brent. I never told Marjorie. Caroline knew because Caroline knew everything, but Caroline understood why I didn't talk about it. And Caroline never told a soul. Some things a man keeps quiet because keeping them quiet is the whole job. So when Brent sat across from me at my kitchen table and started talking about consolidation, I'll be honest with you, I almost laughed. I didn't sign the power of attorney. I told Marjorie I wanted some time. I told her I'd talk to my own lawyer. Brent's face did a little thing when I said the word lawyer, a tightening around the eyes, and I filed that away. 2 weeks later, I got a call from the credit union where Caroline and I had banked since 1987. A young woman named Tasha, who had known Caroline well, called me on her own time to tell me that someone had tried to add a secondary signer to our joint savings account using paperwork submitted by a financial advisor's office. The signature on the request, she said, did not look like mine. It wasn't. I drove down to the credit union the next morning. I sat with Tasha and the branch manager, and I looked at the document. The signature was a decent forgery. Not great, but decent. The kind a man might produce by tracing a real signature off an old check and going over it twice with a steady hand. The notary was someone I had never heard of, in a town I'd never been to. I asked Tasha if she could make me a copy of everything, quietly and not mention it to anyone. She said yes. She said she'd known Caroline for 26 years. She said Caroline had once stayed 3 hours past closing helping her balance a personal account when Tasha was a single mother and overdrawn and crying. She said she'd do anything for Caroline's family. I drove home with the copies in a manila envelope on the passenger seat, and I sat in my driveway for a long time before I went inside. That was the start of it. I want you to understand something. I could have walked into Marjorie's house that night and put the envelope on her counter and said, "Look at what your husband is doing." I could have ended it right there. But Marjorie is my daughter, and Marjorie loved that man. And Marjorie had been Caroline's daughter too. And I have learned in 31 years of this work that you do not show your hand until your hand is good enough to win the whole table. So I went quiet. I started doing what I do. Brent, it turned out, had been busy. Over the next 4 months, working slowly, because that's how I work, I put together what was happening. He had moved my late wife's pension survivor benefit into a brokerage account at his firm without proper authorization. Caroline's signature was on the form, but Caroline had been dead 2 months when the form was dated. He had recommended that several of his elderly clients, including 2 friends of Caroline's from the church choir, roll their fixed annuities into a product that paid him a 7.5% commission and them a guaranteed loss for the first 8 years. He had taken out a HELOC against my daughter's house, the house I had co-signed for them on, and used the money for what looked, from where I was sitting, like a deposit on a condo in Sarasota I was not aware existed. And he had, over a period of 3 years, been quietly siphoning small amounts, never more than $400 at a time, from a joint account he held with my daughter into an LLC registered in Delaware whose only listed officer was someone named Bethany Cole. I looked Bethany Cole up. She was 28, lived in Florence, Kentucky, and worked as a client liaison at Brent's firm. Her Instagram was set to private, but her sister's wasn't, and her sister had tagged her in a vacation photo from Sarasota the previous March. On a balcony Brent's white shirt was visible in the corner of. I didn't say anything. I kept building. Meanwhile, Brent kept asking. He asked me about the power of attorney again at Thanksgiving. He asked me about it again at Christmas. By the spring, he was asking me about it once a month, and he had stopped pretending it was about my future and started suggesting, gently and then less gently, that I might be experiencing some cognitive slowing. I had forgotten, he reminded my daughter at Easter dinner, where I'd parked at Kroger the week before. I had asked him to repeat himself twice during a conversation about his work. He worried, he said, about me being alone in that big house. That big house. 3 bedrooms in a 1962 ranch on 1/3 of an acre. That big house. Marjorie started looking at me different. I could feel it. She'd watch me cut a steak and her eyes would search for something, tremor, hesitation, anything. And she'd look away when she didn't find it, and the next week she'd watch again. Her husband had planted something in her, and it was growing, and there was nothing I could say at a dinner table that would dig it up. So I didn't try. I ate my steak. I asked about my granddaughter. I let it grow. In June, Brent overplayed it. He came over to my house on a Saturday morning alone with a folder. He sat at my kitchen table, Caroline's table, but I let him, and he told me that Marjorie and he were considering moving me to a place where I could be cared for. He said the word place like a man easing a snake into a bag. He said they had toured a facility in Independence that had a memory care wing, and that they thought, given my recent decline, it might be best for everyone. I asked him, very quietly, what recent decline. He said I was forgetful. He said I was isolated. He said I had been late paying my property tax in April, which was a lie. I had paid it in March, in person, at the courthouse, and I had the stamped receipt in my desk drawer, not 8 feet from where we were sitting. I asked him who would handle my finances if I moved into this place. He said he and Marjorie would, of course, together. Then he opened the folder, slid a document across the table, and said, "We just need your signature here, here, and here. It's just preliminary. Just so we're prepared." I looked at the document. It was a durable power of attorney. Comprehensive. The kind of POA that would have given him control of every account, every asset, every deed, and the ability to commit me to a residential facility without further consent. I looked at my son-in-law's face, and I saw something that I had seen across a courtroom many times in my life. I saw a man who believed he was smarter than the room. I told him I'd think about it. I told him I'd want my own lawyer to look it over. He smiled like he'd won, because to him, "I'll think about it," had always been the prelude to a yes. He left. I watched his Lexus pull out of my driveway, and then I went into my study, and I called a lawyer named Henrietta Voss, who I had worked with on 3 federal cases between 2004 and 2011, and I asked her if she had 2 hours that week. She said she had as many hours as I needed. What followed took 11 months. I'm not going to walk you through all of it because most of it was paperwork, and paperwork is boring even when it's the kind that ends a man's life. But I'll tell you the shape of it. Henrietta and I, with the help of 2 former colleagues at the fraud unit who owed me favors going back 20 years, built a file. We pulled bank records. We pulled brokerage records. We tracked the LLC. We documented the forged signature on the credit union document. We documented the unauthorized transfer of Caroline's pension survivor benefit. We interviewed quietly, carefully, 3 of Brent's elderly clients, including the 2 from Caroline's choir, both of whom turned out to have a great deal more to say than they'd ever felt comfortable saying. I went to Caroline's grave in October. I sat on the bench her sister had bought for the cemetery, and I told her what I was doing, and I asked her if I was doing it right. The wind moved through the oaks, and I took that as her answer, because I take what I can get these days. In November, Brent and Marjorie scheduled what they called a family meeting to discuss Dad's living arrangements. They held it at Brent's office, of all places, in a conference room he'd rented for the occasion. They had invited Marjorie's aunt, Caroline's sister, and Marjorie's two cousins, and Brent's parents, and a social worker Brent had retained, and the court reporter I mentioned. The court reporter was, Brent said, for everyone's protection. That last part, the court reporter, was the gift I had been waiting for. I called Henrietta the night before. I asked her to come. I asked her to bring the file. "I'll bring more than the file," she said. "And I'll bring Mrs. Ferencz." Caldwell, the estate attorney who I had retained 6 months earlier to handle Caroline's estate properly, something Brent had been trying and failing to take over. That's how I ended up in the back row of that conference room on a Tuesday in November, 23 people in the chairs, the court reporter at her little machine, my son-in-law in his Navy suit telling everyone I was a tired old freeloader. He'd been talking for 20 minutes when Mrs. Caldwell took her glasses off. "Sir," she said, "do you actually know who this man is?" Brent blinked. "I'm sorry. Your father-in-law, Mr. Boone. Do you know who he is? What he did for a living? Do you know who he is? What he did for a living? Do you know any of his professional history at all?" "He was a warehouse manager," Brent said. "He looked at my daughter. My daughter looked at me. Some kind of logistics, I think. Kroger." Mrs. Caldwell looked at Henrietta. Henrietta opened her briefcase. "Mr. Jetta Boone," Henrietta said, "spent 31 years as a certified fraud examiner with the Regional Insurance Fraud Investigation Unit headquartered in Covington. He has testified in federal court 42 times. He has personally led or contributed to investigations resulting in the prosecution of over 60 individuals for financial crimes, including wire fraud, embezzlement, elder financial abuse, and securities fraud. He retired in 2019 with full commendation. He is, in fact, somewhat well known in his field." You could hear the air conditioning. That's how quiet it got. Brent's mouth did the thing again, the opening and not closing. "I have here," Henrietta continued, sliding a binder across the table. "The documentation, Mr. Binder, across the table. The documentation, Mr. Boone has compiled over the past 16 months regarding certain financial activities engaged in by his son-in-law, Mr. Pettigrew. This binder has been provided in advance to the Kentucky Department of Financial Institutions, to FinRay, and to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Kentucky. Copies are being delivered today." Marjorie made a sound. Not a word, just a sound. The sound a person makes when the floor goes out from under them. "I want to be honest with you. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times, and in my imagination it felt good. In reality, watching my daughter's face, it did not feel good. It felt like the worst thing I had ever done, even though I knew it was the right thing. Even though I knew Caroline would have done the same. There is no version of this where a father wins. There is only a version where a father stops the bleeding." Brent tried to speak. Brent tried to stand up. Brent tried, I think, to leave. Henrietta, who was 5'2" and weighs 110 pounds, soaking wet, told him to sit down in a voice I have heard her use exactly twice, and he sat down. Mrs. Caldwell turned to my daughter. Mrs. Caldwell turned to my daughter. "Pettigrew," she said, "I think it would be appropriate for you and your father to speak privately. I would also suggest, given what is in this binder, that you consider retaining your own counsel, separately from your husband's, at the earliest opportunity." Marjorie looked at me. She had been looking at me different for almost a year, but this was the first time in that whole year that she was looking at me the way she used to, like I was her father. "Daddy," she said. Just that. She hadn't called me Daddy since she was 17. I told her I'd take her home. We left the conference room together. Brent was still sitting. His parents were still sitting. The court reporter, bless her, was still typing. Out in the parking lot, Marjorie stopped beside my truck and put her hand on the door and stood there for a long minute, just breathing. Then she said very quietly, "How long have you known?" I told her. I told her about Tasha at the credit union. I told her about the LLC and the Sarasota condo. I told her about Bethany Cole. I told her about the tour of the memory care facility, which Brent had not, it turned out, told her was actually a long-term residential commitment with no easy exit. I told her about the 11 months. She cried a long time. She cried into my shirt the way she used to when she was 9 years old, and a boy named Tommy Faraday had told her she had a fat face on the playground. I held her in the parking lot of her husband's office, and a woman walked by with a Starbucks cup and looked at us and looked away the way people do. "Why didn't you tell me?" she said. "Why didn't you just tell me?" I told her the truth. I told her she wouldn't have believed me. I told her I had to bring it to her in a way she couldn't talk herself out of. I told her I was sorry. I told her her mother would have been proud of her for the way she handled this minute, this exact minute, and Marjorie cried harder. I drove her home, not to her house. Her house had a husband in it, and the husband had spent the last 16 months stealing from her too, in ways she would only fully understand once Mrs. Caldwell walked her through the binder. I drove her to my house, to the kitchen table where her mother had taught her long division. I made her a grilled cheese because that's what her mother would have made her, and we sat there and ate, and outside the Cardinals came to the feeder Caroline had hung in the redbud tree the spring before she died. The legal part took another year. I won't bore you with it. Brent was indicted in February on charges including wire fraud, securities fraud, and elder financial exploitation. The forged signature on the credit union document was, on its own, a felony in the state of Kentucky. The unauthorized handling of Caroline's pension was, on its own, a federal matter. He pleaded out in October. He'll be at the federal prison in Ashland for somewhere between 4 and 6 years, depending on behavior. His firm fired him the day the indictment came down. Finn Ray banned him for life. Bethany Cole, who turned out to be his fiancée under another name in Florida, cooperated and walked away with probation. The HELOC on Marjorie's house I paid off myself. I'd been saving for 31 years, and Caroline and I had lived modestly, and there was more in our retirement than Brent had ever known about, because, again, I had not told him, because I had not told anyone. The Sarasota condo turned out to belong, on paper, to the LLC, and the LLC was unwound by a federal receiver, and the proceeds went to Brent's defrauded clients, including the 2 ladies from Caroline's choir, who sent me a card with both their signatures on it that I keep in the drawer with Caroline's letters. Marjorie filed for divorce in December. It was finalized 8 months later. She kept the house. She kept her name, her own name, Boone, which she took back the week the divorce went through. She moved my granddaughter, Hattie, into the smaller bedroom and turned the master into hers, and she repainted the whole thing a color Caroline would have liked, and she comes over for dinner every Sunday now. Hattie is 12. She knows some of what happened. Marjorie told her what was age-appropriate, which is a phrase I never used in my life until my daughter started using it. Hattie asked me, one Sunday in the spring, if I was a detective. I told her I had been something like that. She thought about it for a while and then said, "Grandpa, that's actually really cool." Which I'll take. I want to say something, and then I'll stop. When my son-in-law called me a tired old freeloader in front of 23 people, I had a choice. I could have stood up. I could have shouted. I could have said all the things a man wants to say when his daughter's husband is cutting him to ribbons in public. I had every one of those words ready. I had been ready for 16 months, but silence. And I want you younger fellows especially to hear this. Silence is not the same as weakness. Silence is sometimes the only way a man can keep his hands free long enough to do what actually needs doing. My wife taught me that in 41 years of marriage. She taught me that you don't have to answer every accusation in the moment it's made. You answer it when you have the answer. You answer it with paper and with witnesses and with the truth. All the truth laid out so plainly nobody can talk their way around it. Paper remembers. People forget. I forgot a lot of things in the last few years. Caroline's voice, the way she laughed at my handwriting, the smell of her hair in the morning. But paper held on to everything. Every account number, every signature, every date, every dollar. I sit on Caroline's bench at the cemetery sometimes, in the evenings when the light is low. I tell her how Marjorie is doing. I tell her about Hattie. I tell her the Cardinals still come. I don't tell her about Brent anymore. He took up enough of our years already. She knows anyway. She always did. That's the whole story. I'm a 67-year-old man in a 1962 ranch house in northern Kentucky. And I had a wife I loved. And I have a daughter I love. And I have a granddaughter I love. And for 16 months, I was a tired old freeloader until one Tuesday in November, in a rented conference room, somebody finally asked the right question, and I answered it. I've thought about that Tuesday in November more times than I can count, sitting on Caroline's bench at the cemetery, driving home from the hardware store, lying awake at 3 in the morning, the way old men do. And the thing I keep coming back to is this. Every single piece of what happened, the good and the bad, came from a choice somebody made. Brent chose to look at a grieving widower and see a wallet. Marjorie chose for a long time to believe the man sleeping next to her over the man who raised her. And I chose to keep my mouth shut and my hands working until the truth was heavy enough to land. None of it was fate, none of it was luck. It was choices, stacked on top of choices, the way a brick wall gets built one row at a time. If I've learned anything in 67 years, it's that there are 3 things a man has to keep sharp, and most men only keep one. The first is character. Brent had charm and he had ambition, but he didn't have character, and you can build a life on charm for about 10 or 15 years before the foundation starts to crack. Mine cracked as open. It would have cracked open eventually anyway, because that's what foundations without character do. They give. The second is judgment. Marjorie is a smart woman, smarter than me in a lot of ways. But love makes smart people stupid. And for a while, there she let her judgment go to sleep, because waking it up would have meant looking at things she didn't want to see. I don't blame her for that. I just know it cost her years. The third is endurance, the plain, stubborn willingness to keep doing the right thing slowly when the wrong thing would be faster. 16 months I worked on that file. 16 months I ate Sunday dinners with a man who was robbing my daughter blind. There were nights I wanted to put my fist through a wall. I didn't. Because the work mattered more than the feeling. If you're watching this and somebody in your life is making you feel small, I want you to hear me. You don't have to answer them today. You don't have to win the argument at the dinner table. You don't have to prove anything in the moment they're trying to humiliate you. Go quiet, go to work, keep your receipts, keep your records, keep your dignity by refusing to spend it on people who haven't earned the right to take it. And love the people who deserve loving, even when they've made you wait a long time to be seen again. Marjorie still cries sometimes when she thinks about what she put me through. I tell her the same thing every time. I tell her she's my daughter. I tell her her mother would be proud of who she's becoming. I tell her the Cardinals still come. That's the only ending I've got. Take care of yourselves out there.